Boldwood presents Foul Play at Seal Bay, written by Judy Leigh and read by Gilly Bond. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Chapter 1. Morwenna Mutton and her bicycle sped down the hill as one. Houses rushed past in a blur on either side as she plummeted towards the shining sapphire half-moon of the bay. She spun the pedals. It would be a harder ride uphill on the way home, but that was later, and this was now. The road plateaued out as she pushed her trainer-soled feet harder for extra speed, flashing past the pop-up shop where Susan and Barb Grundy raised their knitting needles in greeting. Morwenna waved back. She could imagine them talking right now, their voices a low cluck. There goes Morwenna on her way to the library. It must be almost 9 o'clock. Look at her. All that hair and stripy leggings, and at her age too. They are all the same, those Mutton women. Not one of them cares what anyone thinks. I know Barb, she's no spring chicken. And there's no man in the house now to calm her ways. Whatever does she think she's like? Morwenna grinned as she swerved around a car, the driver hadn't noticed her, and took a left-hand bend into a paved street. Of course, she had no evidence that Susan and her sister Barb were talking about her, but, bless them, they talked about everyone all the time. Their gossip hiding warm hearts as they sat in their shop knitting to raise funds for the Lifeboats Institution. She slowed down outside Seal Bay Library, a Victorian red brick building, the wooden door already gaping wide to greet visitors. She cocked a rainbow-striped leg over the saddle and wheeled the old sit-up-and-beg, complete with basket, into the library. One day she'd get one of those modern electric bikes. It would certainly help with the steep hills that made her lungs heave each evening on the way back to Harbour Cottages. Years ago she'd whiz everywhere with no effort, but now going uphill was slower and harder. Besides, it was the first day of September, the rains would come soon, and it was always less fun checking in borrowed books when you were drenched from head to foot and steaming. Morwenna shook her hair free of her collar, a fountain of silver. Now she was in her 60s, or wear it in a sensible bun. It would be more appropriate, apparently. Morwenna laughed. The word appropriate wasn't invented for her. She'd always had long hair. She wasn't going to change now. She leaned the bike against a wall in the corridor and sauntered into the library, smelling the welcoming, dusty aroma of much-loved books. Louise Piper was efficiently arranging novels from the returns trolley onto the shelves. She turned, short flame hair, a flash of red lipstick, and smiled a greeting. 9 o'clock. Bang on time. Kettle's on. Cup of tea. I'd love one. Morwenna stowed her jacket and bag in her locker and watched Louise's brisk movements affectionately. Louise was absolutely reliable. She ran the Seal Bay Library 5 days a week with military precision. 10 years younger than Morwenna, she was her complete opposite, sensible, inscrutable, married. They were the perfect partners. Louise handed Morwenna a mug with the scrawled slogan, "No one's perfect, but being Cornish is near enough." Morwenna took a sip. "Are we on for a swim on Sunday, bright and early?" "Wouldn't miss it." Louise slurped milky brown liquid from her own mug. "It's a shame we can't get more people to come. If only they knew how good it is for body and soul. Will your mum come along? Or will it be just us two and a few random stragglers?" Mum keeps threatening to turn up, but it's too early for her. She sleeps in until lunchtime and then grumbles that her hips are sore. She is in her 80s, though. "That's no excuse," Morwenna protested. "She's always telling me we're from strong female stock." "What about your daughter?" Morwenna shook her head, her hair spilling over her face. No way. Tam's too busy with the tea shop and looking after Elewin. Although I'd love to take the little one swimming with us. She's like a dolphin in the water. She's desperate to join in. Tam says she can come when she's 10, but I think now's as good a time as any. 5 isn't too young. She'd be safe with us in shallow water. She would, Louise agreed. She put down her cup and reached for a pile of books. It's time to tidy up. We seem to have a lot of stray books this morning. Morwenna gazed at the pile on the counter. Has Lizzie been up to her tricks? Louise was serious. She has. She's been at the biscuits again, too. The packet was open when I came in, crumbs all over the floor. And she's been rearranging the books under the counter. You probably ought to address her properly. We should respect the dead. You don't really believe she's haunting the library, do you? I do. I find books every day where I know I haven't left them. By the door, beneath the shelves. And she loves snacks. She even had a bite of a cheese sandwich I left behind. Louise's eyes were round. We definitely have a restless ghost at large. It's probably my fault there are books left out. I didn't eat the cheese sandwich, though. Morwenna grinned. Being serious, it is a known fact that Lady Elizabeth died in terrible circumstances at Pengellan Manor, and is said to haunt the town library because it was her sanctuary. Apparently her husband treated her badly, and the only way she could escape him was by coming here to read. I believe it. Louise was serious. Then her husband broke her heart, and she took poison. Lady Elizabeth's only solace was her books. She often hid away amongst the ordinary folk of Seal Bay. Now she returns to us each night. Morwenna waved a copy of Wind in the Willows she'd just found beneath the counter. Well, I agree with her about being among books. A good read is the best companion. She finished the last gulp from her mug and joined Louise, who was arranging novels on shelves. Who needs a man when you can read a good book? But love is everything. Louise touched a copy of Sense and Sensibility. Jane Austen said, to love is to burn, to be on fire. She sighed. I'm so lucky to have my Steve. We've been married 30 years this Christmas, you know. She also said, friendship is certainly the finest balm for the pangs of disappointed love. Morwenna quipped quickly. I'm done with romance. It's too much like hard work. You can't mean that. Louise paused before she asked, do you think you and Ruin might get back together one day? After all those years, bringing up Tamsin through thick and thin for richer and poorer? We became a habit. We were just going through the motions in the end. We're still friends, but no, things went wrong for us. Morwenna was lost in thought for a moment. I still see him some mornings, heading off at dawn. Being a fisherman keeps him going. I don't think he'll ever retire from the boats. It's his first love, the sea. She shrugged. His only love. Isn't it difficult, having him living across the road? Morwenna joked. She indicated 2 books. Oh, look, Emma and Inhaltsangabe are in the wrong places. Lizzie was busy last night. Louise put a finger to her lips. She'll hear you. If she does, I'll ask her to tidy up once she's finished reading. Morwenna's eyes twinkled. There were footsteps in the corridor, and Louise jerked around nervously, startled as a rabbit. A young man walked in, slender in a smart jacket and jeans, a sweeping fringe over his eyes. Morwenna rushed across. Hello, Simon. How's it going? The young man leaned on the counter. I need something to read. Then you're in the right place. Morwenna smiled. What are you looking for? Something on business? Economics? More John Maynard Keynes? I finished uni a year ago. I've just been bumming around since. Simon shrugged. My dad says I need a job." "How is Alex?" Louise asked, strolling across to the counter. "I never see him much." "Or my mum," Simon grunted. "They do their own thing." "Well, it's such a big house. I expect it's easy to lose them." Louise leaned on her elbows. "And you have such a lovely view of the sea. I always say to Steve, if we had pots of money, that's the house I'd like to buy. It's remote, beautiful, on the romantic cliff top, the best spot in Seal Bay. I want to get a flat in Truro. Or London." Simon gazed around the library. "I was born in London, but we've been here for 10 years now. I'd love to go back. Nothing ever happens in Cornwall." "Oh," Morwenna said brightly, "so you came in for a good book. Shall I recommend something escapist? A fantasy, perhaps?" Simon shrugged. "I don't know. I thought maybe a book about gambling. One that shows you how to win lots of money." "We have The Logic of Gambling," Louise suggested. "Yeah, that'll do for starters." Simon fumbled in his pocket for a library card. "I'd like to be rich and independent. It'd be better than working for Dad." Louise rushed over to a shelf and found the book almost immediately. Simon turned to Morwenna. "I bet it's quiet in the tea room now the holidaymakers have gone." "The Emmets, as we call them in Cornwall?" "Yes, one more week and that'll be the last of them," Morwenna said sadly. "Trade always drops in September, and it doesn't pick up again until March, although we usually manage. But it's good to have the visitors. I like meeting interesting characters from all over the country." "This time of year has its compensation, though," Louise said, placing the book in front of Simon. "I always think you and Tamsin make such a good job of keeping the business going off-season." She smiled. "Do you remember the Proper Handsome Halloween night? Proper Handsome is such a good name for your family's tea room. A proper handsome Cornish welcome's always guaranteed. We had a great night, dressing up as vampires and ghosts." "And not a sign of Lizzie." Morwenna raised an eyebrow. "I like the calm atmosphere in the autumn," Simon said quietly. "I can sit with a coffee and read without anyone disturbing me." He avoided Morwenna's eyes. "Tamsin's really nice. She never hurries me up or asks me to buy more coffee. She just lets me look through the window for hours at the sea rolling in." "Sounds wonderful." "Don't forget your book," Louise reminded him. Simon's dreamy expression left his face, and his eyes narrowed as he gazed at the book. "This is what I need, a lucrative hobby." "Don't we all?" Morwenna agreed. But Simon turned slowly, engrossed in the blurb on the back cover as he ambled out of the library. "Bless him," Morwenna said kindly. "He's lonely, I think. He's never really settled here. He's nothing like his dad. Alex is ambitious. And his mum has a high opinion of herself." "The Truscotts are all right," Morwenna replied. "It's hard being accepted in Seal Bay if you're not a local." "They've been here 10 years, he said," Louise protested. "Imelda Parker, Llewellyn's teacher, has lived here for 20 years, and there are still some people who think she's an outsider. And she was born in Penzance." Morwenna winked. "The Truscotts own so much of Seal Bay. I think that's why people don't warm to them, because they're entrepreneurs." Louise smiled. "Simon's sweet on your Tamsin. It was written all over his face." Morwenna laughed. "She'd eat him alive. Besides, she's a good deal older than Simon. And she's getting engaged. The party is on the 9th. Are you coming? I wouldn't miss it. We're holding it on the beach. Fancy dress, pirate theme. Bring a bottle. We're organising food." "I can't wait," Louise replied. "I love a good dance and fancy dress. Mind you, there will be some clearing up to do the following morning. That's all sorted. The family and neighbours will pitch in. Unless we ask our... If you're listening, Lizzie, there's some litter picking on the beach next weekend." Morwenna and Louise were quiet for a moment, all ears. Then, in response, a dull creak came from a distant corner of the library. Morwenna lifted an eyebrow meaningfully and whispered, "I think she heard us." Louise's face was a picture of horror as she held her breath. Morwenna squeezed her shoulder and grinned. "Only joking." "What do you like?" Louise tutted loudly. Morwenna lifted her empty mug. "Time for another cuppa. And a biscuit, I think, before our resident ghost steals them all." Chapter 2. At 12:30, Donald Stewart, polite and formal behind a white goatee beard and metal-framed glasses, arrived for the afternoon shift in the library. Morwenna was on her way again. As she lifted a leg over her bicycle and crammed her bag in the front basket, she heard him talking quietly to Louise. "I believe I can communicate with the dead. There is a definite presence here, a strange coldness to the air." Morwenna smiled at the thought of Louise and Donald trying to contact the ghost. She followed a bus around a road island into town, towards the front, where the proper Ansem tea room stood, painted white and blue, with a panoramic window overlooking the sea. An old white van was parked outside, blue letters on the side that read "Jack the Painter," a cartoon of a young man smiling with a brush in his hand. A ladder was leaning against the wall, under the topmost window of Tamsin's flat above the shop. Morwenna tugged her bike inside and rushed to the toilets, coming out moments later wearing an apron. She grinned in the direction of the young woman with the light brown ponytail, blue-striped T-shirt and dungaree shorts, who was collecting cups on a tray. "Time for my afternoon shift." Morwenna flapped her arms. "I'm all sweet-smelling now. Nothing like a good wash and some strong deodorant, as my mum always said." "Tell the old tea shop, why don't you, Mum?" Tamsin Pascoe grinned, pulling a face. Morwenna looked around. A couple in anoraks were inspecting the cutlery. A family of 4 in the corner nibbled a shared cake. A curly-haired man in paint-spattered overalls was slouched in a chair, eating a scone, pushing half of it into his mouth. Morwenna nodded to him. "How are you doing, Jack?" The young man tried his best to reply with his mouth full. "Fine, thanks, Morwenna." "Are you on your lunch break?" She took in his overalls. "Or just—" Jack Greenwood looked momentarily awkward, until Morwenna gave him a friendly wink. Tamsin took over. "I've asked Jack to give the outside wall a lick of paint while the weather holds." Jack finished the scone. "Tam wants the flat upstairs painted too." Tamsin grinned. "Now we're both living here, I thought it was time for a smart new look. Jack's going to give the place a complete facelift and do Eloine's room. She wants sunshine yellow walls." "She's our little ray of sunshine." Morwenna gazed towards Jack, who was washing the scone down with tea. Tamsin moved towards Morwenna, muttering, "Mum, can you take over here? I need to get back behind the counter. Table 2 want cream teas, and table 5 have 1 piece of cake between them. See if you can get them to buy some drinks." "Right." Morwenna glanced at Jack, who put his feet up on a chair, and she stifled a smile. 9 months ago, he'd arrived from somewhere up country, met Tamsin, and began a painting and decorating business from a tiny bedsit. Then a month ago, he moved into the flat. Morwenna thought he seemed like a nice young man, but in her heart she worried that they'd set up home too quickly. She believed in taking time over decisions, but she knew why they'd moved so quickly. They were impetuous, in love, and they wanted to be a family, with a Lewin at the heart. Morwenna wondered how her granddaughter would adapt. Her family's happiness was everything. Her own relationship to Ruin Pascoe, Tamsin's father, had been happy at first. It had lasted well. Then it had become routine. Then it was nothing. Finally it was over, 18 months ago. She wanted more than that for Tamsin. Besides, Jack would be a stepfather to Eluin. and Morwenna hoped that Tamsin had someone who'd care for her. Jack seemed to love the little 5-year-old girl, swinging her high at every opportunity, making her laugh. After all, Elwyn would never know her real dad. Morwenna wasn't even sure that Tamsin did, but that was another story, and as far as Morwenna was concerned, the less said about that, the better. Elwyn came first. "Mum," Tamsin hissed. Morwenna had been staring through the window towards the rushing sea, in dreamland. "Sorry," Morwenna blinked. Then she scurried to the family on table 5. "Can I get you all some drinks?" "A pot of tea for 2 and homemade lemonade for the children," the mother replied, all rounded vowels. She smoothed her trousers. The father beamed, showing gleaming teeth. "Do you make it on the premises?" "My daughter makes it. She does most of the cooking here," Morwenna said with a smile. She noticed Jack sit up straight from the corner of her eye, his face shining with pride. "Mummy, can we have cake too?" one of the children asked. He was around Elwyn's age, his hair parted smartly at the side. "You could all share mine," the father replied quickly, and Morwenna wondered if the family was short of money, despite appearing so neat and tidy. So many people were less well off than you'd think nowadays. She imagined them on holiday on a budget, at a campsite or in a small caravan, trying to have fun without spending much. She resolved to come back with an extra piece of cake. She'd say it was the end slice. She didn't want it to go to waste. They could have it on the house. As soon as she'd deposited the fresh tray and 2 slices of cake in front of the family, she rushed back in to collect the cream teas for the couple in matching anoraks. Then the doorbell chimed and Carol Taylor blustered in, a flustered woman with bright cheeks. 2 small girls pushed through the narrow door in front of her. The smallest, dark plaits swinging, hurried to Morwenna and clutched her waist, almost butting the tray. "Grandma!" "Elwyn!" Morwenna put the tray down and bent over to kiss her warm cheek. "How are you, my beauty?" "I'm all right. Come in, Brittany and Carol have some lemonade?" "I'll bring you some over." Morwenna smiled. "Take a seat, Carol. You must be worn out, looking after your own little one all morning, and Elwyn too." "I'm all in. I'll be glad when they're back at school next week. They're both in Miss Parker's class. I like her, even though she comes from Penzance." Carol collapsed at a table, and Brittany, round-faced and blonde like her mother, copied her actions. "The Emmets are almost all gone now. It'll be quiet at the guest house until the spring." "I bet," Morwenna called over. "It must be nice to have a few months off from running the B&B. Vic has me helping at the garage through the winter. He says I'm good at selling cars. He says I have a persuasive face." She beamed. "You should buy a car, Morwenna. We could do you a good deal at Tailor-Made Motors." "I'm still doing all right with the bicycle." Morwenna picked up the tray and delivered the cream teas. Then she returned with glasses of lemonade. Elwyn clambered on Jack's knee and was chattering happily. "And I had to tell Oggy not to be such a naughty boy, but he kept running ahead of me on the sand, and I told him his paws would be all messy when we got home, and Mummy would be cross." "Where's Oggy now?" Jack. "He's on his lead, silly." "Oh, of course he is," Jack said, with a grin in Tamsin's direction. He had little experience with children, but he was trying his hardest. "Oggy," Carol mouthed. "She's been talking about him non-stop all morning. I haven't a clue what she was on about." "It's her dog. He's a golden Labrador," Morwenna explained. "What?" Carol frowned. "He's invisible, you daft old bat," Brittany chimed. "Only Elwyn can see him." Carol's cheeks turned purple. "Hey, less of the daft old bat, young lady." "Well, that's what Daddy calls you," Brittany retorted, and reached for a glass of lemonade, oblivious to her mother's embarrassment. Morwenna offered a complicit wink. "We hear about Oggy and his antics all the time. We just go with the flow." "Talking of the flow," Carol changed the subject, Do you still go wild swimming every Sunday morning? Most weeks, yes, Morwenna said. I've been swimming in the sea since I was a Lewin's age. We used to just call it swimming then, although we were always fairly wild. I might join you one of these days. Carol's voice was full of enthusiasm. I need to get fit. Vic's always telling me that. You'd be very welcome. Morwenna grinned. She knew already that Carol wouldn't come. She said the same thing every week. The good intentions were there, but Carol lacked the willpower. Or the time. Or the energy. Morwenna wondered if she should offer to call round for her, to make sure she turned up. Can I come swimming, Grandma? Can Augie come? Lewin called, scrambling from Jack's knee and rushing to wriggle on a seat next to Brittany. Augie loves swimming, and so do I, although I know the water is too bloody cold, because Great-Grandma says it is. Great-Grandma doesn't come very often. Morwenna took a breath. Drink your lemonade, my beauty, and we'll talk about it with your mum directly. Great-Grandma says directly all the time. Lewin pulled a face. It's supposed to mean soon, but when she says it, everything takes ages. The tea room was quiet for a moment. People eating, drinking. Tamsin came out from the kitchen with a cup of tea and plonked herself down for a short break while things were less busy. She hugged Lewin, blowing a kiss to Jack, who greeted her with a wink. Then the doorbell chimed, and a man sauntered in, causing everyone to sit up in their seats. Alex Truscott had that effect on people, in his pristine suit, tie blown over his shoulder in the wind, hair just over his collar. An expensive cologne. He raised two hands as if conducting an orchestra, encouraging everyone to remain seated, to carry on as normal. Then he turned to Morwenna. I popped in to see you, or your mother, if she's here. I'm not sure who I ought to talk to. As his eyes fell on Tamsin, he smiled the easy grin of a man who liked women and was comfortable around them. Maybe it's you I need to talk to, Tam. Who is the actual owner of the tea room? All three of us are, Morwenna retorted. Tamsin stood up. Tea or coffee, Alex? Strong coffee, black, no sugar. Alex smiled, his eyes unchanging. He was oblivious to the fact that Jack was watching him as if he was an intruder. Carol folded her arms across her chest defensively, and Morwenna placed her hands on her hips, chin thrust out. What can we do for you, Alex? Morwenna wanted to know. Can we talk privately? Morwenna shook her head. Is it about buying the tea room again? You asked me during the summer and I said no. The answer hasn't changed. Alex arranged his face in a politician's smile. Perhaps I should take you and Tamsin and Lamorna out to dinner, and we can discuss it properly over a bottle of wine. Morwenna breathed in deeply. The answer will still be the same. Mum and I told you that last time you asked. Morwenna, Alex sighed as if bored. It's the end of the holiday season. The tourists will be leaving soon. The tea room doesn't make as much money off-season. Lamorna told me herself it was difficult to manage last winter, and according to the papers, this next one will hit Cornwall hard. So why not cut your losses and sell now? He gazed up as Tamsin came back. She placed a cup of coffee in front of him, and he touched her wrist fleetingly. Thank you, Tam. Morwenna examined his face. He was handsome. Probably in his early 50s, an arrogant mouth set in the confident smile of someone who always got his way in the end. He leaned back in the seat, stretching long legs elegantly, sipping coffee as if he were already the proprietor. Lovely, Tam. You make the best coffee. Thank you. Tamsin smiled, and Morwenna noticed how her expression was suddenly shy. Alex Truscott had power over women, a magnetism that he relied on. Morwenna spoke up. We're definitely not selling. She frowned. You own plenty of other places in Seal Bay. Why would you want to buy the tea room? I need a business for my son. He's done nothing. Alex tapped manicured nails on the table. "This place would be ideal for Simon." "Of course." He gave Tamsin his most seductive stare. "You'd stay in the flat above, you and little Elwyn. The rent would be minimal, naturally." Morwenna noticed that he had ignored Jack completely. He spoke as if no one else was in the tea room, except himself and the person he was addressing. "How about it? I'd give you a very good price." He pressed Morwenna's hand, his thumb against her wrist. "You could retire. I'm sure you'd like that." Morwenna didn't skip a beat. "I'm sure I wouldn't. The tea room is Tam's livelihood." "And how old are you now, Tam?" Alex swivelled round. He took his time, his eyes straying over the striped top, the dungaree shorts. 28. Tamsin's face was suspicious. "What's that got to do with anything?" "You have responsibilities. You have a loan to think about. I'd offer you a job behind the counter. You'd be perfect," he told her. "Behind the counter?" Tamsin frowned. "I'd turn this place into a takeaway. Pizzas and burgers. It would do extremely well." He played his trump card. "It's what the Seal Bay community needs all year round." "I don't think so." Tamsin frowned, just as Brittany chimed, "I like pizza. Mummy, can we come here for pizza?" "The answer is no, Alex," Morwenna said quietly. "Now you ought to finish your drink and leave my guests in peace." "Very well." Alex sipped his coffee, then stood up. "My price is on the table throughout September. But if this is a hard winter in Cornwall financially, as it's predicted, then naturally my offer will reflect that, when you decide to sell. We'll talk again." He turned to Tamsin. "Think about what we've discussed, Tam. After all, we're talking about your future, and Elwyn's." He seemed to notice the other diners for the first time as he delved into his pocket and placed coins on the table. "I bid you all good afternoon. Enjoy your tea." The doorbell clanged, and he was gone. The couple in the matching anoraks turned back to their teapot and scones. The family of four shifted in their seats, and the father asked for the bill. Carol said, "Well, I think he has a point. I mean, he might be from London, but he has plenty of money and swagger. Last year he gave £1,000 to the lifeboats, and everybody says what a good man he is. He and his wife do a lot for our little town. He bought the Range Rover from Vic, and there's not much money in Seal Bay nowadays, so you should take your chance while the offer's on the table, Morwenna. He makes my skin crawl, truth be known." Tamsin shuffled away, round-shouldered, busy with the bill. Jack scraped back his seat and muttered, "I'd better get back up the ladder. It'll rain later." Elwyn wrapped her arms around herself and muttered, "Oggy and I don't like him, do we, Oggy?" "But he's going to get everybody pizzas," Brittany insisted. "He's got a point," Carol said again. "The proper handsome tea room used to be a thriving place. In winter, it's as quiet as the Blue Dolphin Guest House, but at least we have the garage to fall back on. I remember years ago you'd be able to buy 20 different flavours of ice cream and milkshakes here, and all those different teas, Lady Grey and chamomile, and that funny-smelling lapsang shoopong. Now you only do a few cream teas and coffees. It'll be a long, cold winter, you mark my words." There was silence for a moment. Then Morwenna shook her head. "The tea room isn't for sale. That's our final decision." Her hand clenched itself into a tight knot. "The tea room is a pizza takeaway indeed. You wait until I tell Mum. She'll be furious." Chapter 3. "Guess on. He never said that, did he?" Morwenna Mutton was standing on the beach early on Sunday morning in a red swimsuit, hugging a fluffy beach towel. "He did, Mum. As I stand here." Morwenna smoothed her rainbow swimsuit. She shivered, holding up a stretchy swim cap, bundling her hair beneath. "Shall we go in?" "Directly.
Hang on, I've got to get this hat on.
Lamorna made several attempts to tug on the vintage swimming cap, composed of dozens of brightly coloured petals. Each time, it slid from the smooth-dyed blonde locks of which she was so proud.
Bloody thing won't stay on.
Here, Mum, hold your hair and I'll pull it on for you. Morwenna tugged the cap on the top of her mother's head, and it stayed there like a balloon.
Keep still. So, let me get this right, Morwenna. Alex Truscott wants to buy our tea room so we can turn it into a pizza takeaway. And he wants to charge our Tamsin for the privilege of staying in the flat. That's about the size of it.
Morwenna wondered if the swimming hat was too small, or if her mother had an unusually large head.
This thing doesn't fit properly. I'll just go in without a cap.
It's important to keep your head warm.
Me? Invisible? Never.
Lamorna stamped her red toenailed foot in the sand.
And we aren't selling our tea room to anyone.
Exactly.
Over my dead body.
The foot stamped again. Lamorna breathed hard.
Or his dead body. I'd swing for him.
Tam got the full-on Truscott charm offensive, you know. Persuasion dressed up as flattery.
What did her fiancé say? Jake or John or Jim or whatever his name is.
You know it's Jack, Mum.
He's an Emmett. Why does she want to marry an Emmett?
She thinks he's a nice Emmett.
I'm not sure I like him, to be honest. There's something shifty about him.
Tam loves him, Mum, Morwenna said. He's her choice.
I don't trust him.
Do you trust any man nowadays?
Morwenna, isn't that the truth? What are we like?
Lamorna cackled.
A couple of hard-boiled old women without a man in the world. Who gives a monkeys about men, anyway?
She laughed again.
They grow on trees, 10 a penny. I won't be without one for long. Your dad taught me a lesson, though. Never depend on them. They'll let you down. Especially Freddie.
Morwenna was used to her mother's rants about her father. She'd last seen Freddie Quick when she was 4 years old.
Quick by name, quick by nature, that man. Here today, all the promises and the charm of an alley cat on heat, then gone tomorrow.
Lamorna trotted out an old worn phrase.
I thought you and Bruin would stick together for the long haul, but no, you threw him out to live in the house across the road. Oh, well.
Lamorna's face was suddenly sad.
And Tam comes back from a holiday 6 years ago in the pudding club. What are we like, we mutton maids?
Unlucky? Morwenna offered.
Not at all.
Lamorna thrust back her shoulders.
We're strong and independent, and we keep our wits about us. Men are just chaff on the winds of change. I brought you up to rely on yourself.
You did, Mum, and I'm glad of it. Morwenna waved a greeting. Here are the others. We can get in the water now. I'm starting to get cold.
Me too.
Lamorna hugged the beach towel over her cleavage.
Are you sure this wild swimming will help my arthritic hip? I might be in my 80s now, but I don't feel a day over 20.
It's definitely beneficial. Morwenna grinned. Good for your mental health, improves circulation. It's even supposed to help with your sex life. Lamorna narrowed her eyes. Louise Piper was scuttling forward in a long tent-like towel. Behind her were the Grundy sisters, Susan and Barb, in matching tight costumes and white caps. Straggling a few paces behind was Donald Stewart, wearing a wetsuit and a pink rubber cap, hugging a basket of sandwiches. Lamorna noticed him wave in her direction and groaned.
It's doing nothing for my sex life so far.
Hi, Louise called happily. Steve's not coming. I don't think he enjoyed it last time. He's got a bit of a cough. Besides, he has to get up early tomorrow. Driving that lorry full of fish halfway round the country takes it out of him. Morwenna grunted assent. I called at the Blue Dolphin for Carol Taylor, but I couldn't raise her. She's still slugging in her bed now the guest house is quiet, Barb suggested. I don't think they've had anyone to stay all week.
She could do with the exercise, Susan added, and they gave each other a knowing look. Louise smiled. 6 of us, then? I thought Lewin might come. She wanted to. Tam says she's too young. She's very protective. Morwenna recalled the discussion she'd had with Tamsin. Jack's taking them out for a picnic. He's cheering Tam up after the Alex Truscott episode. Lewin wanted Oggy to come see swimming with her, but... Oggy? Susan and Barb asked together. Lamorna barked a laugh. I'll tell you. She isn't allowed to have a dog at home, so she just makes one up and gets everyone else to believe he's real. Shall we get into the water? Morwenna hopped from one foot to the other. It's cold. Barb and Susan threw their arms in the air. We were born ready. I'm ready, Donald added. But beware going in head first, like Mr. Darcy from Pride and Prejudice. That would be very dangerous. I'd jump straight in with him, that handsome one in the film with the wet shirt. I'd leap in and drag him out, Lamorna piped up, and then I'd give him mouth to mouth. Come on, Morwenna urged, throwing her towel on the sand. I'm off. Follow me in. Right behind you, Louise called from behind her shoulder. Directly, Lamorna said, although she stayed where she was. She had no intention of moving. Morwenna began to run towards the water, feeling her heart beat faster. As the waves splashed around her feet, she heard her mother call, I might just stop here and have a quick paddle instead. Then she was in, up to her waist, shoulders, ears, and swimming. The ice of the sea took her breath away as she moved her arms and legs in a steady rhythm. Morwenna loved the sensation. The air punched from her lungs. She felt as if a lobster had clamped itself to her buttocks. And she was suddenly calm and laughing out loud with the joy of it. Louise bobbed up next to her, and they swam together for a while, in a controlled, steady way, aware of their breathing rate, taking a few steady head-up breaststrokes. Morwenna looked around for Donald and the Grundy sisters. They had been coming to the swimming sessions since March, so she wasn't worried for their safety, but she liked to check on them nonetheless. She saw 2 white hats and a pink one bobbing closely together, buoyed on the waves. They were fine. Louise grinned and called, I'm freezing. I just love it. Morwenna nodded, just to keep herself warm. She leaned back and closed her eyes. Being held in the arms of the ocean made her feel calm, cleansed, and after a few seconds her thoughts steadied. She felt peaceful, as if nothing mattered except to float in the moment, thrilled by the chill of the water. Worries seemed to dissolve on the tide as she watched the scudding clouds overhead. Thoughts about Tamsin came to her, the engagement party on the beach, the plans for a Christmas wedding. Morwenna hoped she and Jack would live happily ever after. Her mind moved to Lewin. She'd be a survivor, like the rest of the Mutton women. The future was an uncharted territory. Morwenna would not always be around to help her daughter and granddaughter. She wondered if she should get Lewin a dog. Tamsin had said a strict no, not in the flat, but the child was desperate. Then Morwenna recalled Alex Truscott, his suggestion that business would be slacker than ever this winter. Tamsin said Jack would try to support them, but custom for his decorating business was unpredictable. Morwenna breathed out. She felt herself let go, and the worries wafted away on the waves like flotsam. Ruin's handsome face appeared in her mind, his affectionate smile, and the anxiety returned like billowing surf. She'd never loved anyone as she loved him. They'd been together for years. She'd believed he was a keeper. They'd brought Tamsin into the world, adored her. And in the busy routine of life they'd somehow lost each other, and love had been replaced by silence and empty space. It had been worse than that at the end. It had been a car crash, a crumpled wreck from which their relationship could never return.
Morwenna tried to let go of the images and realised she was cold. It was time to swim back. Louise was shouting and waving an arm. Morwenna returned the wave, a sign that all was well, and she pushed strongly towards the beach. Lamorna's bare feet were in exactly the same sandy spot. She shivered beneath the towel.
"You look colder than I am. Glad I didn't come in. No wonder the lifeboats are always out there rescuing people, all you bloody world swimmers getting yourselves in trouble."
She gazed around at Donald, smiling as he attempted to open a thermos flask of coffee, spilling it everywhere as he quivered violently. Louise was struggling to adjust the strap of her swimsuit, her teeth rattling like peas in a bladder. The Grundy sisters were walking around hugging themselves, flapping their arms like strutting chickens, legs all gooseflesh, water trickling in a steady stream from their swimsuits as they tried to warm up. Morwenna gazed down at her skin, mottled blue and red, and grinned.
"That was absolutely great."
Lamorna looked pleased with herself.
"I'm perfectly warm here. I enjoyed my little moment's reflection on the beach. The hip still hurts, though, so come on, everyone, get changed, quick as you like. I need a strong drink after all this exposure to the cold."
Later that night, in No. 4 Harbour Cottages, Morwenna sat in bed in pyjamas, reading a book by the glow of a lamp. She clutched a mug of hot chocolate between her palms, sipping slowly. The curtains were open, lifting on the night breeze. She looked up from her book and gazed out across the harbour, staring at the inky water and the tiny glimmering lights of bobbing boats. Her thoughts moved to Ruin in the cottage across the road, No. 9 with the sea-green door. She hadn't seen him for a few days, and she couldn't help the strange feeling that found its way to her heart and nestled there. She imagined him tomorrow morning in oilskins, making his way through wind and drizzle in the glimmer of dawn towards the waiting trawler. They had argued about the dangers of his life as a fisherman so many times. "Fishing's in my blood," he'd say. And Morwenna would say nothing and worry in silence. She watched a little longer. The harbour was peaceful now, yellow lights shimmering, reflecting shot gold on the water. She hoped Ruin was happy. But it was too late to think about it now. Tomorrow would be busy. She'd be out first thing, cycling to work at the library as usual, then waitressing in the tea room in the afternoon. There would be fewer customers now, but she and Tamsin would devise new ideas to bring in more punters. They'd all be fine. Something about him disturbed her. He was cocksure, too determined to get his own way, and it could only bring trouble. Morwenna preferred a peaceful life nowadays. She'd concentrate instead on Tamsin's engagement party next Saturday. Friends would be there, family, Ruin too, and there would be dancing and pirate fancy dress. It was just what she needed. Chapter 4. As the evening of the party approached, one small area of Seal Bay Beach looked like a fairy tale scene. Morwenna had put up strings of coloured lights around a gazebo. A trestle table had been covered with salads, pasties, pizza, flans, York cheese, crusty bread, stargazy pies, licky pies, and piles of scones with jam and cream. Jack, handsome in his Captain Jack Sparrow costume, was finding it difficult to keep his fingers away from the buffet. Morwenna watched fondly as Tamsin grabbed his hands. "There will be nothing left if you keep eating it all, Jack." He kissed her, and Morwenna noticed the easy affection between them. Then Lamorna was at her side. "It's looking good. We'll turn the music up and let our hair down. We can show these young ones a thing or two." Morwenna flung a loose arm around her mum. "Tam's happy." "It's what she wants, I suppose. One man, stability. But he wouldn't be my choice for it." Lamorna raised an eyebrow. "Have you seen the engagement ring, though? It's like a bloody pebble." She tugged Morwenna to face her. "I'm loving the groovy pirate gear you've got on. Morwenna looked down at the glittery top she'd teamed with yellow leggings and boots, the pirate hat and plastic cutlass, and at her mother's costume, the green hoop earrings, the low-cut dress, painted on beauty spots, hair in ringlets, bare feet. She hugged her again. "We make a right pair."
"We're bloody handsome."
Lamorna laughed. Then she elbowed Morwenna lightly.
"Have you seen who's here with the beer?"
Morwenna glanced across to where her mother was pointing. Two men dressed as pirates, in striped shirts and cut-off jeans, were carrying a barrel, hoisting it onto a trestle, and she felt a familiar lurch in her chest. Ruan Pascoe, still lean and